And before we do attendance and the Pledge of Allegiance, just a note, I just misplaced that flyer, but there's another Suez rate hike hearing on September 29th in the evening. I think it's at RCC, but I'll take a look at that. If anybody wants to come out and comment on the rate hikes that we've been seeing and their new proposed rate hikes, this is your last chance to do that on September 29th. A lot of the rate hikes have to do with paying the costs for research and advocacy for the desal plant that many of us fought so hard to stop because it didn't seem like the right way to go, pumping Hudson River water into our water grid and charging us a lot of money for the enjoyment of that water. So that's a note. I don't see Dennis yet. So, and just a couple other things. Next week, there's going to be we're going to have presentations by architects who responded to the town's call for proposals for taking a look at our space needs, given the fact that this building is reaching the end of its life, and we'd like to look at some options for bringing the building department and consolidating it with the rest of Town Hall. So we'll have those presentations on the 4th. There's also a public hearing on the Blauvelt fire budget, which happens every year. There's going to be a regular workshop meeting, and we'll probably have some follow-up discussion about the town budget, which we've been working on for many months, but I'm going to just present a little summary of it tonight. And that will be my presentation, and then we'll have public comment, and I have a bunch of people signed in here. And we have a couple of hearings on zoning issues, and then other matters before the board. We got Dennis here. If I could just ask our deputy clerk to take attendance in and
Good
get us
evening
going.
and welcome to the regular town board meeting of Tuesday, September 27th, 2016. And on a roll call, Councilman Troy?
Present.
Councilman Divany?
Here.
Councilman Valentine?
Here.
Councilman Batari?
Here.
And Supervisor Stewart?
Here.
I would ask everybody to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to recognize that we have some younger folks in the room tonight, and I welcome you to Town Hall. It's great to see you take an interest in town government. We hope this is always a place where you feel welcome, and with your parents or your classmates to bring questions or concerns. And know also that in our public meetings, we have a certain format that works for public statements, but when it comes to really asking questions and kind of getting into things, you're welcome to arrange to meet with me, other town council people, town staff. And I will note, because it's sometimes of interest to families, we've actually been running tours of different town facilities. We had the police open house a week or two ago where kids got to see our jail. And also periodically we have tours of, for example, the wastewater treatment plant, which is pretty eye-opening for most people. And we'll talk a little bit about the facilities down there tonight. So welcome to the kids, and hopefully you'll stay awake for a little while anyway. So let's start with a presentation of the town budget. Our finance director is here, Jeff Benstick, did a wonderful job with Janice Ganley, Director of Fiscal Services. And we're going to hand out copies of the budget, and it will be reviewed in the coming weeks, and there will be kind of a procedure that ultimately will culminate in a town board vote on a final adoption of a budget in November. So I always prepare some statements. They're meant not just for the people in the room, but for people who might later check in by YouTube or might be watching on TV, to summarize kind of where we're at with the town financially. And I think it's pretty useful. It'll take about 10 minutes. So I'll cut to the chase by saying the following. Tonight, we're going to have a presentation of the supervisor's budget. It's the first draft of 3. On October 18th, we're scheduled for the town board, after considering this budget, to make any changes, vote on those. Then we'll schedule a public hearing, which is on November 1st, and there'll be a final budget vote on November 15th. The changes to the budget going forward are made by town board vote. And there always are changes. The tentative budget is based on months of work collecting data from our department heads, and I thank our department heads, many of whom are sitting in the room tonight, for your work on the town budget. And I know that we're always trying to straddle the principles of making sure our operations are well-funded and also being careful to stay very lean and control growth because our taxpayers are heavily burdened, as we all know. I believe that this proposed budget does strike the right balance between funding the essential services and controlling costs. And I think that it challenges us always to work harder, a little smarter, a little more efficiently. And I look forward to the members of the town board taking a look at it, meeting with me, meeting with our finance department, meeting with the department heads more, and making any improvements. I'm sure there are improvements to be made, as long as they don't increase our taxes. But I think that there's things that we can always do. If we need to add a little money for one thing, we can usually find a way to save money somewhere else. My comments are really aimed at providing a big picture, and they'll take a couple minutes to introduce the themes that we always talk about when we talk about the town budget. And that is, where are we under the tax cap? Where are we in terms of fund balance and using reserve money to pay for things? What are the big projects or capital projects that we're looking at? What's up with our special districts? And what are the things that are driving up our costs? And what are our ways of saving money? So those are the main topics, and I'll just review those quickly. Under the tax cap, that's a state law that limits the allowable tax levy in our town. And under that formula, our tax levy, including the sewer unit charge, is down 2.2% from 2016. So it's going from about $5.5 million to about $49.5 million. That's the tax levy. That's what we're asking people to pay as part of their tax bill. And we're staying under the tax cap by about $110,000. Gives us a little wiggle room, but not a lot. It's a very good thing for taxpayers. I want to be clear, however, that is often the case that taxpayers see their bill go up. So our levy is one thing, what it says on your bill is another, and that is partially affected by the balance between commercial taxpayers and residential taxpayers. And as we all know, if you're looking for an answer to the sort of eternal question of why is my bill going up when they say they're doing such a great job of keeping the tax levy low or down, the reason is, in a word, Pfizer and other examples of commercial properties that are reassessed and the residential and other businesses pick up the burden from that. There's another thing that I want people to understand, and that is that the $50 million or so that is our tax levy is really only, it's the biggest part of our budget, but there's a whole other chunk there. Our total budget is about $72 million, and the difference between those numbers is essentially the non-tax revenues that the town always depends on for providing services. And examples of those things are, for one thing, the fund balance, which is tax dollars from yesteryear that are carried forward and get used judiciously, both as a cushion for a rainy day or an emergency, and also to use when we can to control the growth of taxes. Other things in non-tax revenues are payments in lieu of taxes when businesses like IRG and others, the Bloomberg Company and others that are lured to town, have a payment plan that's different from taxes. And all the fees that we charge for different specific services to town residents, whether it's getting a permit for building a deck or utility companies paying the highway department for opening up roads, film permit fees, we've heard a lot about that, and the town clerk does a great job. We get money from the film companies when they do their shoots. All these things come up, and they're basically non-tax revenues, and they make up a big chunk of our budget. And that budget is going up a little bit. Unfortunately, the non-tax revenues offset the increases that I'll tell you about a little bit, for the most part. So what we do is we review and project on those revenues, and we also look at every single line in our budget and try to make sure if we can cut it a little bit, we do. If it needs to go up a little bit, then that's the way it's got to be. And just as a reminder, the New York State tax cap, and I know our town council has talked about this many times, it's a very hard number to beat. It's not 2% the way it was launched several years ago. It's not 1%. It's really closer to 0 at this point. And our allowable tax levy under the cap is down by another $1.4 million because of pilot payments that we're receiving. Those are payments in lieu of taxes from businesses that have a tax deal. And I am a supporter of pilots when they're done right. We're getting more money than we otherwise would by providing a kind of escalator for the business. It starts out at 50%, goes to 100% over 10 years, and it means they locate here and they pay taxes on sites that otherwise might not get redeveloped. So I do find hope, however, in the pilot program and the tax certs we have to pay out the businesses that get their taxes reduced, like Pfizer, it really do impact our budget. And I just want to note that, that there is kind of a fundamental shift taking place in that system, in that, whereas the town is paying out in 2017 about $1.5 million for Pfizer and other businesses for these tax cert payments, in 2018 that cost really is expected to plummet down to about $200,000. And this is because we're in the last of a 5-year agreement with Pfizer that the town and the school district signed, and overall their taxes have come down by about 45%, which required these givebacks over time. But that agreement is basically ending, and now that IRG is there, that's bought up the majority of the campus and started bringing in businesses, they have a pilot which is paying into the town about $1,075,000 in 2017. So there's a big shift going on, but nonetheless, these numbers affect our budget dramatically. And one of the things is that whereas before the Rockland County, Rockland County is forcing the towns to budget for our tax cert payments out to businesses, and whereas before the county would pay those tax certs and then put them on their own tax levy for town residents. The town residents still paid for that, but it was part of the county budget. Now they're forcing the towns to budget for that, and it really does shift our budget pretty dramatically, adding about $1.5 million in expenses. And that's a big increase in expenses. And we'll have a bit more to say about kind of cost shifting by the county in a minute or two, but that does affect our budget. As far as the fund balance go, I mentioned before that we use those are tax dollars, those surplus tax dollars that are used judiciously to offset expenses in the coming years. The plan is to use $2.4 million. Over the last 4 or 5 years, the town has planned to use anywhere between $1 and $3 million. And as is often the case, because we budget conservatively, and again, I want to give credit to the town board and our finance director and all the other department heads. Conservative budgeting basically means if you have an expense, you err on the high side. If you're having a revenue, you err on the low side, and then at the end of the year, you usually come out a little bit ahead because you've been conservative. And our fund balance is doing pretty well. It's about 30% of the town budget. It's actually grown by 40% since 2012. So these are taxpayer dollars, and we're going to use some of them, and this budget model that we've created for the town board to review uses $2.4 million in fund balance, and that keeps our taxes from going up, our tax levy. While I'm talking about fund balance, this is one of the questions that often comes up when we're looking at special districts, and our special districts are wonderful organizations. Their money comes out of the town budget. I'm talking about our 4 libraries, 2 ambulance groups, the paramedics, Blauvelt Fire Department, wonderful groups. We have financial responsibility for these organizations, but we don't manage them directly. So they come to us and we talk about their finances, and then we budget for their needs, which are essential to the town. And we cannot fail to scrutinize their budgets just like everybody else's. For example, a few years ago in 2013 and 14, the libraries took 10% cuts, and that was because they had accumulated very large reserves because all their budgets were combined into one under state law. And so they were lucky enough to get funding set at a rate that was for the most needy, and so everybody else kind of accumulated reserves. And so the town board's been cutting down on that. We're getting to the point where their reserves are dwindling fast. And so in my proposal here, I'm proposing, their requests have been modest, and I propose to fund them at their requested levels. They come in anywhere between 1 and 5% for their budget proposals. I'm worried about their future, particularly that of the Orangeburg Library, in terms of dwindling reserves, and I think it's something that we all need to be aware of. I am very impressed and thankful to library staffs and their efforts during these tight fiscal times to work with the town, and hopefully we'll all work together to make sure that they keep doing what they're doing so well for many years. I want to also make special mention of the Blauvelt Fire Company. It's a group of people with amazing dedication to community. Because of their tight fiscal management, their own spreadsheet or finances show that they allow for basically a $200,000 reduction next year. And the reason for that is that they're lucky enough to be finishing paying off a big bond. on their facilities. So their direct costs are going down by about $158,000 because of that, which makes sense to reduce their budget. The town can use that money on other things. In addition to that, while we're historically have funded those reserve lines that they need to get the trucks, going out 4 or 5, 10 years, spending millions of dollars on trucks, funding those reserve lines to the rate of about $160,000 a year. Keeping that constant, there's also been a budget surplus of around $85,000 a year. So I've pegged that number maybe a little lower than the guys would like to see, but at $200,000, I think that they're gonna be. There's no doubt whatsoever they'll be just fine. And if for some reason, defying the kind of projections of their finances, they end up running a deficit, we can always address that. I have full confidence that won't happen. The other big question for our budget I mentioned before basically has to do with the big things we have to buy: capital spending, what we use bonding for, what we're going to put in the budget. Like all state and local governments, Orangetown uses bonds to pay for long-lasting equipment. And typically the bonds for about $4 million, highway, sewer, parks, other things. We had a bond last year that paid for police cars and sewer lines, tennis court surfaces, road resurfacing, things like that. Our next bond is out about a year, so this budget just has a few capital items in it, and it's something the town board is going to want to look at carefully. What we have in there, based on our discussions, is the demolition of 2 derelict buildings, one of them at Blue Hill and the other at Cherrybrook Park, upgrades to the Bronsdorf Park and Pearl River, some maintenance, some crack sealing on basketball courts at Veterans Park, a new software system for the police department that enables them to use computer-aided dispatch, essentially, to facilitate responses to calls and tracking of department resources. And there are several old pickup trucks at the highway department, sewer department, and the animal control that need to be replaced. The biggest item I want the town board to look at here is going to be the replacement of an aging pressure truck in the sewer department. After conversations with Joe Moran, who's sitting here, our sewer commissioner, and the town mechanics, it seems clear that the pressure truck is on its last legs and needs to be replaced. It costs about $400,000 to get a new one, or $365,000 or something like that. And that's something that's in here. It's a big bump for capital spending for the sewer department, among other smaller items. In general, obviously, we're reticent to spend a lot of money, and we often take cars that are coming out of the police department, bring them down to the fire inspectors, the appraiser, the guy who delivers the mail. These other things that the town can do with vehicles that can still have useful life in them. And then eventually they're auctioned, and we recoup their value that way. While I'm on the topic of these kinds of vehicles, I just want to mention that we're always writing grants. And recently we were awarded, and we're doing paperwork tonight actually, on the Tappan Zee Bridge Fund Community Benefits Grant. And we're going to get 2 police cars, 2 of those electronic signs for detours and special events, and some other items related to traffic safety. And it's really a great help, and we thank them for that at the same time as we're trying to figure out how to buy more vehicles that we need. It should go without saying that we're always scrutinizing our capital spending, and we're always leaving our departments a little bit disappointed. And it's understandable, since our employees and department heads are so dedicated to providing top-notch services, and they don't ever want equipment failure to compromise the service to town residents. On the other hand, we can often keep equipment going longer than expected, and when we bundle these big purchases into a bond once in a while, we get low interest rates, and we have the fewer number of times we issue bonds, the lower our transaction costs are, because it costs money to issue bonds. So overall, that's our strategy. It usually leaves people wishing they had a little more. And we're in good financial shape overall. Our reserves are increasing, as I mentioned before. Our debt is decreasing overall. Our Moody's rating remains a very respectable AA2. I want to mention a couple of things that are forcing our budget up, and a couple of ways that we're reducing spending in the coming year, or that we're working on. I mentioned the county cost shifts to town. I just want to lay that out. There are basically 3 items. One is this tax cert thing, right? That's about $1.5 million right there that we have to put into our budget we didn't before. The other is that there's a system by which the towns are being charged for a portion of the tuition of students who go to the community colleges outside of the Rockland Community College. So students are going down to Fashion Institute of Technology, for example, or over to Westchester or up to Orange County Community Colleges. They're actually charging us for part of those tuitions. We object to it. As we always say, I've said this on the radio and other times, we run summer camps for kids. We don't run college programs, and we think the county should absorb that cost or figure out a different way of paying for it. And we've called upon our leaders in Albany to change that mechanism. Another cost shift from the county is running elections. Didn't have to do that before. Now it costs us $200,000 a year. We don't have to run them. We just have to pay for them. They run them, and hopefully they're doing a good and efficient job of it. But it'd be nice if they could pay for it themselves. These add up to about $1.9 million in 2017 alone. I'll mention also, just a year or two ago, they cut funding for police officers who are assigned to the countywide drug task force, which left us with a hole in the budget. And I'll mention, just because it's sort of a familiar theme around here, we've been talking about air quality a lot. They also eliminated their program at the Department of Health focused on air and odor issues, and that's burdened the town further with the need to chase after stuff that we used to have more help with. And then we talk a little bit about the state of New York, and we are lucky. We have gotten grants. I feel proud of it. We've gotten funding for a sludge press at the sewer department. We've gotten great grants and cheap financing on sewer relining, a green infrastructure project in Japan that is really amazing. You know, these infrastructure monies are really important to us. On the other hand, I think it's recognized that in New York State and across the country, in general, the funding of infrastructure is just lacking, and it is a state responsibility. And there are roads and bridges which are rusting and that are going to need to be replaced. And if you look back at our infrastructure, you know, a lot of this stuff was built not just with local dollars, right? Sewer systems and roads and highways and things like that. We need the state to step up. One thing they could do that would just be kind of incremental is that schools, when they do their tax cap, their capital projects aren't included. Whereas for the town, if we're paying for a truck for the sewer department, we're paying for fix a new roof, that expense is counted towards our tax cap. And that exemption for schools, I think, should be available for towns as well. Having said all of this, I want to remind us that personnel costs are essentially what drives the town budget. They've grown in proportion to the total budget over the years, and now we're at about 70% of the budget are personnel costs, that's salaries, health benefits, and in retirement and workers' comp and things like that. And that's a big number, and our people do really important work, and we try to be as skimpy as possible when adding new people. And of course, when there's retirements and senior employees retire, we save some money while thanking them for their service. The new members of the CSEA coming in now pay 17% of health insurance, which is a big help. The town board negotiated that in a past contract. Bless you. But this is, again, and always the biggest challenge for a town like ours. In my view, we are staffed at what is basically the absolute minimum necessary. And in some cases, there are vacancies, and we're actually understaffed. And ultimately, the costs associated with personnel are they're contractual or they're really kind of indirectly under our control. And that's an issue. And there's a variety of things that need to be taken up at the state level to try to provide remedies and give towns a little more wiggle room to be able to do what we need to do for people without having it cost quite so much. I just want to refer people to the New York State Association of Towns and the Conference of Mayors. Both have websites, both have legislative agendas, and both speak very directly to many of the topics related to the cost of local government. I just want to mention just on personnel item that we are adding one position in this budget, and that is an assistant maintenance supervisor at the sewer department. And respect the sewer department, what they're trying to do down there, and there are others that we didn't fund, but we put that one in. I also want to mention something the town board has talked about and requested that we put forward, and that is that budgeting for cost of living raises for elected officials. And I want to note on this, because sometimes it can be controversial, I really don't think it should be, that the elected officials in Orangetown for almost a decade haven't had any kind of change in salary. And many are part-time, some are full-time. We have to recognize that the salaries are in general below what is paid in neighboring towns, and that every year with inflation, they're losing value. And these are leadership positions, and we do need to do something that makes sense just to compensate for inflation. So we've put some extra money in the budget It's roughly half the value of adding a new maintenance supervisor in the sewer department, or a little more than half the value, to bring elected officials up about 1% a year. I think it's a total of about 7 or 8%. So we're budgeting at least we don't even stay even with inflation, but kind of mitigate the effects of inflation a bit. Meanwhile, it bears some remark that all other town employees being on contracts and getting step and increases and so on, that pay on average goes up around 4% a year. So the situation of elected officials has become kind of off kilter, and we're budgeting some money to start to mitigate that. I don't think it fully mitigates it by any means, but it begins to head the right direction. And I really do respect the work of our elected officials here, our town council members, our town judges, highway superintendent, clerk. These are people who are valued, and we need to make sure these leadership positions remain attractive. Just in terms of new revenues, I'm not going to go through my whole list here because I've been going for a little while, but I do want to mention a couple of things. Perhaps most importantly, the new management of our golf courses has made a big difference to the town budget, and we did Broadacres went to contract for Applied Golf. Applied Golf now runs Blue Hill, and we're saving around $600,000 a year. And it really is commendable that the town board and the Parks Department and Applied Golf really did get where we needed to go in terms of really restructuring. And the employees who are working through attrition, and with the help of Donna and personnel and others, and particularly the Parks Department, the other department heads, people kind of had bumping rights and went places, and we ended up reducing the overall number of town employees, but really holding on to people who wanted to work for the town and putting them in places where their work was really needed. Other examples of money saving that's been going on, I'll just give you a small example. I'll come back to the sewer department for a second. The Salisbury pump station. It's a pump station. It's needed to move wastewater from down the line towards the wastewater treatment plant. But they figured out a way to decommission it and take it offline and just pipe the stuff right on through, and got the throughway to pay a large part of the bill for that change. Those are pumps and electricity and repairs that no longer need to be made. So that was a good move. A couple other examples. The streetlight deal. I know I've talked about it before. We actually signed the agreements to buy our streetlights from O&R, and we're in the process of putting together requests for proposals to get companies talking to us about which fixtures to use, converting over to LEDs. That promises to save the town around $250,000 a year, and we're taking advantage of the lower rates for electricity delivery charges that we can get just by owning them ourselves, and then the lower amount of energy used with LED bulbs and the lower maintenance cost. It's going to be a great cost-saving measure. Really looking forward to moving that project along this year. I'll mention one or two others. Just for example, on the cable franchise, for example, Cablevision pays the town money to have its boxes and cables running every which way, and we commissioned an audit, a specialized audit. It turned out they weren't paying what they're supposed to pay, so we're going to be getting extra $25,000 a year from those guys, and they're making a one-time about $100,000 payment. So we chase after this stuff. We recognize that we can't control everything, that there are matters beyond our control and within our control that raise our budget, and also other ways of decreasing our budget. There's a lot of big and small decisions that go into making a budget. And over the coming weeks, I know that our members of our town, the alert public, and members of the town council and department heads and others will continue to work on this. And I hope that we've created a model and a first draft, which is very helpful towards getting to mid-November and approving a final budget that keeps us under the tax cap, funds the most important things we have to pay for, and keeps the burden on town residents as low as humanly possible. So I had a couple of things I want to say, but I think I've gone on for long enough. Hopefully that summary helps people to understand where we're at. I'll have copies of these notes and the budget itself up on the town website in the next day, and we'll move along doing our very best to continue to manage this town in a fiscally conservative but very progressive way, spending money on the things that people really need and not wasting a dime if we can possibly avoid it. Thank you very, very much. And again, kudos to our department heads for your budget work. to our finance team, Jeff and Janice and their team, to Vicky Caramonte sitting here, my assistant, who's really just been enormously helpful, and Alan Riff, our deputy supervisor. And we all sat down, we've gone through every line, we've done our best to create a budget that is useful as a tool for planning for this town and defensible. And we look forward to hearing what people have to say about it. So thank you very much.
Andy,
Yes, sir.
it says that the increase over last year's budget is 6.78%. Is that correct, Jeff? Yes. And what's the real increase after you spend the fund balance? Because I'm doing numbers up here, just got this. You're using 2.5 million, not 2.4 million, it's 2.5, which is 3.6% of that increase. The real increase is about 3.1%?
Well, last year we used 2.5 million. This year we're using 2.4 million in appropriated fund balance.
Well, I was just looking at your numbers and fund balance for 16 and 17, and it adds up to 2.5, so I'm just...
You'd have to show me
Well,
that page,
it's,
but
but I guess the question is, so it's 6.7, 3.6 is roughly what the percentage of fund balance that counteracts at 6.7. Is the increase roughly about 3.1%?
in the total budget,
Yeah.
when you take that out, it would be, well, it would be more than that. What you have, Tom, is you have a lot of different numbers that,
No, I understand. I'm just saying it's 6.78%. If we're spending $2.5 million, which is the number I'm getting, that would be 3.6% of that that would be 3.6% of
Right.
that 6.78.
Give
My
or take,
question
yeah.
is, the real increase is 3.1% or not? Like, because that's the number I'm getting. I'm just trying.
right, well, you're taking that out. It would actually be the opposite of that, Tom, because you're appropriating fund balance, so you're adding to the revenues line of 2.4 million. So if you didn't have that, then your revenues would be 2.4 million less, and you would have to take 2.4 million in additional taxes to cover that if you didn't do the appropriated fund balance.
So if we didn't, the increase is 6.78%.
Yes.
So that's the increase without the fund balance?
That's the increase in the expenses.
All right.
And in order to get
And
there.
to get the expenses down, you're using fund balance, which
Correct.
brings the increase to 3.1%. That's the question.
No, it brings the increase to 6.78%.
That does,
Guys, we got to break it down maybe in more of a workshop format.
I don't,
So-
it
So it
doesn't
doesn't
make
really
sense,
help
Jeff.
to.
It doesn't make sense.
Because we've done this before with other things, and one person's got a sheet of paper, another person's trying to hear
No,
verbally.
I'm just saying,
So-
the increase over last year's budget is $4,632,000. We're spending $2.5 million of fund balance. That leaves us $2,132,000. That is the increase after you appropriate fund balance, which that 2.132 million is 3.1% of that 6.78%. And then the remain, I'm just trying to figure out what is the real increase? Because you're saying it's 6.78%, but if that's the case, we're over the cap.
So you just, I mean, honestly, maybe what we need to do is go through the tax cap calculation.
We need to know
because
what we're really increasing it.
Right, so there's the tax levy itself,
Yep.
which comes to around $49.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously the budget is closer to 72. So there's about $22 million of the budget which are funded through non-tax revenues. And so when we're looking at tax increase, it's one thing, which is basically flat. When you're looking at the overall budget, that's what I was describing in the speech.
I want to know what the overall budget is.
The overall budget goes from about.
Let's not get lost in semantics.
Well, it's not semantics, because I think what matters to people is what their taxes are.
Well, it also, how much money are you spending? I mean, my big question
There's
is.
a total of $72 million.
It's like, I'd like to also know if anything, did we do any cuts? I mean.
Yes.
Well, we're spending 632 million more than last year, so.
Right, so what
I'd like to
happens
know
in every budget, and those are some things I was
I know,
outlining.
I've done this
there-
more than you,
there's-
Andy. I'm just saying, it doesn't look like
Then what
you
you
cut
probably
anything.
understand is that every year, there are new expenses
Mm-hmm.
that boost things up, and it challenges you to get it back there, and then you do your cuts. If you get $100 in new expenses, and you only find $50 in cuts, you're up by $50.
Mm-hmm.
If you get $50 in new expenses, and you found $100 in cuts, you're down by 50. So that's the balance that's being struck. So by all means, dig into it,
I will.
get straight with it, sit down with the piece of paper and the finance director.
I'll find the
and
fat.
That'd be great. Find it, let's cut it out.
But,
That's exactly what we want
you
to
know,
do. And I know that you know how to do
We'll
that.
find what we don't need, but what we do need is this is what I'm proposing.
I see that for the first time right now, yeah.
No, I talked about this with you last
Yep,
week.
we did discuss, this is interesting.
Is that we've had issues with certain projects in town, Nalitech, Aloof. Danny Sullivan proposed that we add a position to the town attorney, town board, building department would be a zoning enforcement officer and community liaison. Investigating complaints through site inspections, interviewing property owners, tenants, mediating disputes, working with the town attorney's office in preparation of litigation papers, gathering evidence to assist town attorney in defense of town, works with the deputy town attorney in reviewing building permit applications to ensure compliance with zoning codes. So Danny suggested this about a year ago. He's the zoning board chairman. He called me a couple months ago. He says, we really need it. I think we do need it. I think you need that position. And I don't know, what the salary is going to be. I think you do need some kind of scientific background and hopefully you need some zoning, code enforcement experience. So I'd like to put that position and add about $150,000 to the budget for that position and to give that position the ability to hire experts. So I'm thinking salary 60 to 70. Experts, maybe 70 to 80,000 if appropriate. If we don't spend the money, it'll go back in the fund balance, but I think we really do need this.
That's a really, really creative idea. How are we going to find out what this title would be graded? Yeah, is that the Joel Epstein?
John Giardello thinks they have this position in Clarkstown, and we can talk to Clarkstown. But it might be higher because we're gonna have to deal with Rockland County personnel. This is an existing position up with Rockland County personnel right now.
Right.
I think I wanna tweak the definition, but I think it would be useful. So that's something I would like to see.
Thank you for
I'm sure I
that.
can find $150,000 in this budget.
I bet you can. And I think this would be something the town would benefit from. Yes, sir?
Yeah, no, I support the addition of this position, and the fact that the zoning board chairman came up with it, I think is good, because they're trying to respond to the people's various requests through the last couple of years, which have been painful at times. But I have a request back to Jeff. All right, Jeff, I asked you, I don't know, about a month ago, I said that we used to have something from the finance director, saying exactly where we are as of right now in 2016, where we're heading in 2017, all these projections. But I think it fits in also to what Tom is asking for. You're going to give us your notes, Andy, you said that's good, in terms of what you're reading out. But coming from you, what the highlights are, what was taken out, what was not put in, all right? Just give us a better picture, all right? And again, obviously, we have the whole budget, we can go through it. But sometimes when you're looking at the whole budget and you're going through, you're looking at percentages, and it's not necessarily giving the right picture, so.
Yeah, and I could address some of that right now, Dennis, in terms of the changes, and Tom, this will go to some of your question as well. You indicated a, overall budget increase of something in the $4.6 million range. Revenues and expenses have to match each other. That's, core principle. So what were the key changes, to come up with a $4.6 million increase? On the expense side, you had $1.5 million from tax certs. You had the community college chargebacks of $250,000, Parks capital increase of .1 million, workers' comp up .4 million, hospitalization costs up .5 million, our risk up .1 million, sewer
Right.
capital up .3 million, police retirement up .2. You add all those up, you get
All right,
like,
that's really what I'm looking for.
Right.
And did we budget for the, taking down the building out the golf course? Is that in there?
yes, it is.
All right, just want to make sure.
We have 2 demos in there, the Blue Hill House and the
The Cherry Brook, the old
Town Hall's next year.
vacant building there.
So the one good thing on the revenue side is we did receive the pilot of 1.9 million. But there is a lot of confusion in terms of what's included in the tax cap and what's in the overall budget. They are completely different. The sewer is completely excluded from the tax cap. The other main thing is, even though we got the benefit of the 1.9 million or almost $2 million in revenues from the pilots in our budget, for tax cap purposes, they take that back out. And so that's why you see drastically different numbers, because what the comptroller is trying to say is, all right, your assessed value and what is your organic growth in your tax rate in your budget, and they view a pilot as one time. And it's sort of negative, it really negatively benefits the town, because not only do we get a negative impact on our assessment with Pfizer assessment going down, but then they don't let us count the revenues on the pilot side. So there's a lot of moving parts with it, and what I would just say is that the tax cap calculation is completely different from the budget. We are $100,000 under the tax cap, but you can see the budget increased by 4.6 million, and it was really driven, in large part because 2 million of it was from the pilot payment, which we didn't have before. So, and then it's other departmental revenue increases that allow it to, offset and match and still be under the tax cap.
No, I just want to thank Andy and the Finance Department for working so diligently on this. I know we've all been here on Saturdays, meeting with department heads. I can't really comment on this because you just gave me a 150-page document, and I'm not sitting here in 30 seconds and reading it and starting to pick it apart. But we will sit down, as we do every year, and we'll sharpen the knife and see how close we can get it. And as far as Tom's position, it seems like a good position. I just want to make sure that we're not duplicating services. I don't want to have more code enforcement officers than I do building inspectors. And it seems like, if we have 2 code enforcement officers, maybe we should expand their title unless we need this for full-time. I know there's the code enforcement officers that we have, and I don't think a zoning enforcement officer. I mean, I have to see what the difference is. I'm not a big fan of expanding government if we don't have to. So I'll read it diligently, and I appreciate Tom putting this forward, and I'll read it. And
Yeah, I don't want to be duplicating building department, building enforcement officers. I don't, if that's it, we'll fund it and then we'll take it out. It's a completely different kind of enforcement I think we need. Because it's an enforcement officer and a community liaison, and I think that we need that. Because, it just seems there's, some people in town don't think that, the town is working for them. I think more interaction with someone that is a neutral trying to enforce our code, our zoning code, and will be a good thing for the town.
Yeah, I agree with that. As I'm reading this, it just seems that this may fill a void that we've run into with different companies like Anelitech and others as they're coming into the town. So, again, we'll talk about it further, but I think it may fill that void and give someone else or give people an avenue to go. We have a lot of complaints that people go down to the building department, they're overworked, so I think it's a good idea.
If that'll do for right now, we will arrange the workshop sessions. We'll provide secondary materials on the budget, list of capital projects, requests funded, the other items that you were asking about, tax cap calculation worksheet, stuff like that. We should go on to our Let's see, where are we anyway?